Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you.
We're here today to talk about a subject that I think really impacts so many of our clients, so many people that are struggling with deep grief, and hopefully we can get some insights about how we're impacted physically by the grief and how it affects our breath and why that really matters to us. So let me start by saying one of the most common complaints I hear from our clients is that they're not sleeping well, followed closely by issues with eating, either can't remember the last time I ate, or I don't do anything but eat. Um, you know, and I know from our previous conversations that you believe that a lot of this starts with issues with our breathing. So first off, what happens to us when we're in grief in terms of how it affects our breathing patterns?
Well, I think the most important thing in context of breathing is that we think of it as an unconscious act. It starts there. And when the body is under a lot of stress, the mind is under a lot of stress, everything is totally different and changed over a course of a moment. Then we go into a process called fight or flight. It's easier to say that. It's actually called fight, flight, or freeze. In those moments, it's a protection. It's a way for us to protect and put our guard up. When that happens, we aren't really thinking about our bodies as much as all the emotions associated with what's going on in the time. What happens then is our body understands and our mind understands that it's a fearful place that we need to protect. That's where it starts.
There's a quote from C.S. Lewis from his book, A Grief Observed, that I really love. You hear it, you see it a lot. It's probably the most commonly quoted thing in that book. C.S. Lewis says, "I never realized that grief feels so much like fear." And it took me a while to really understand, but I think he's talking very literally that when we're in grief, we have that same sort of tension and anxiety and stress, and our bodies react just as though we were afraid for our lives. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about.
And that's exactly what's happening. And I know that then when our bodies are like that, we are in fight, flight, or freeze. We're ready. But it's important to also note, to take a moment and understand it thinks it's protecting us at this time.
Uh-huh.
Unfortunately, that protection can get kind of put the body like hiding in the back corner in a way. We don't sleep well. We don't eat well. We don't take any kind of care for ourselves. It's lucky we got a shower.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's part of the other part of the protection. So the gut doesn't work very well because we're in fight or flight. And why would the human body want to have food in there when we don't want the juices in there? We want to keep it in the muscles and
right.
everywhere else, and hyper mode in the brain. All that blood supply needs to be elsewhere but the stomach.
Right.
So that's where the lack of ease of the stomach occurs, and that's where hunger it isn't even noted. It's not even important because we're getting ready for battle.
I have observed in myself when I'm stressed that I have a tendency to shallow breathe. I have a tendency to mouth breathe, and I'm guessing those are not unusual reactions.
They're very useful for a flight or fight mechanism. When we're getting ready to get the beast, as it were, whatever that beast is in our world, we raise our shoulders up and we try to fill up our lungs, and we try to get all that oxygen, hyperventilating actually in that oxygen. But when we're in a place of grief, it's a place of frozen. And so we have all this energy and all this breath that's up inside, up in our bodies, and it's not relaxing because it's getting ready to fight the beast. So we have to understand that that's actually not an abnormal feeling in the moment. But there's also an understanding that breath is conscious. It can be on purpose. And if we take our breath and say, wait a minute, let me put a pause or a moment and take a breath and do it the way that is the opposite of that high-shouldered feeling, we can actually have a moment where the stomach calms down, our brain calms down, we can actually get some rest. We can actually kind of slow down.
I have read that one of the issues with shallow breathing is that we don't fully empty our lungs, and that in spite of the fact that most of us sort of naturally think that the primary concern in breathing is getting enough oxygen in, the real issue that arises, especially with shallow breathing, is that our carbon dioxide balance gets out of whack. And so I'm curious, what does that do to you?
It's not exactly that we don't use our full lungs. It's actually that we're putting out more carbon dioxide. We're filling lots of oxygen in and pushing out a lot of carbon dioxide, so our balance is off. And what that does is makes our brain find the hyper mode, the hypervigilant. That in theory we should be running from it, like running from the beast, or we should be facing that beast forward. And neither of those happen in grief. It turns into a different kind of shutdown.
I think many of us wish sometimes it was as simple as facing the beast. So it's fascinating that we have a tendency to react in a way that basically exacerbates the problem, right? We have all of this tension and stress and really confusion about how to move forward, and the way that we react just heightens all of it.
It's survival.
Yeah.
It's a survival mode, and that's what we think. That's what our bodies think that we're doing. That's what our mind is doing back in the very simplest part of our brain.
And so we talk a lot about this idea that the griever's primary mission, especially early in their grief journey, is survival. But the irony is the way that we react makes it harder to survive. And so, there is, as you alluded to earlier, there's a need to kind of consciously engage a breathing pattern that counters those effects.
That's right. And I think that's where we go from an acute process to more of a chronic response. And as soon as we are able to get through that acute part and that right now thing, then as time goes on a little bit, we get a little bit better at understanding to slow the body, if you know how.
Yeah.
And I think having just a moment in the day, just practicing it all the time, then you're ready when you feel those overwhelming moments that you are just out of control. You can go, wait, I can stop, I can drop my shoulders, and then I can breathe differently. And that seems to be the key, is to allow your body in a conscious way to fill up down below and expand that diaphragm down and leave your shoulders alone in a moment. If you can just imagine that you can have all your emotions, but you're going to take a gap. And in that gap, you allow your body to go, oh, phew, I can hold still for a minute. And that's where healing can happen on all levels, emotionally, spiritually, physically.
So it is interesting then that we can view breathing as a skill we can develop, that we need to be conscious about. I know I've read a little bit. I've probably encountered more than I fully have been able to understand about different breathing approaches. But I know that there are people who essentially devote their whole lives to developing this skill set. Is it necessary to go that deep to get a positive effect?
No. And actually, after 5 breaths, it can work. And when I teach people about that, when I teach children, there's a story that everybody's heard about. Stop, drop, and roll in a fire.
Yeah.
With a fire, that's how you take care of a fire.
Right.
So I've developed this thing that's pretty quick. It's just stop, drop, and breathe. And I just changed. I said, in a moment when you're ready to do it, and practicing it when you're not in that moment of hyper vigilant thought, and just kind of get ready. And so you just actually can change your whole chemistry within about 5 breaths. It's that fast.
And so what is your body going through when you change your breathing pattern that has an effect so so quickly?
One of the simplest ways to understand it is that our bodies are working off the autonomic nervous system. That's your fight or flight and calm and relax. And so when we are working on what the body's actually after, the cranial nerves, like the vagal nerve, is one of the most functional and most life-saving nerve that we have. And so it has a communication with the phrenic nerve, which is part of the diaphragm.
Mm-hmm.
So stretching the diaphragm, let's say the lungs, under the lungs, we stretch that down, it automatically tells the vagal nerve to calm and just hang out. There's no danger. And it works that quick.
And the diaphragm, as I understand it, is just kind of a sheet of muscle, basically, under the lungs.
It's the muscle that allows the lungs expansion and contraction, and it's automatic. But and it works with the phrenic nerve to regulate chemistry, and then the vagal nerve comes through and has a communication with that phrenic nerve. So if you have the communication that says there's no problem here right now, just for a minute, by taking that breath and stretching that diaphragm down, you tell the phrenic nerve and that it's calm. The vagal nerve says we're cool here, and you have a moment and a gap in that stress that fast. It can be done I honestly, in 5 breaths, I can see the change in people's faces. I can see everything settle in just for a moment, and then they can know that it can happen.
So as regards to how breathing impacts our sleep, I can understand that this sounds like this would be a way to release stresses and relax, but are there other effects of breathing properly that lead to better sleep?
Absolutely, because it takes you to a calm place, so you're not in that fight or flight all the time. Your mind can spin, but the attachment to the spin cycle can take a break if you're watching and observing your breath and you're concentrating on one thing just for a moment, and it can off you go.
So a big part of the process then is visualizing that flow of
if you need to, or you can visualize the balloon of your belly expanding and contracting. What I teach children is colorful bubbles going in through the nose and then holding out down around the belly button for a minute, which isn't really real, but it's a thing, and then come back out again in front of them. And so if you're visualizing, butterflies, anything you want, you have a concentration of thought that changes the cycle thoughts that are in the brain just for a minute.
Right, and kind of breaks the pattern that's sort of destructive in that way. And of course, many people in grief get caught in those cycles of.
It's expected.
Yeah,
they're ready to do battle. They're ready to be protecting themselves and their world around them, and that would be expected.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean you can't have those thoughts. Those are part of grief. We're not dismissing them.
Right.
We're just giving a moment of concentration that your body can say, okay, wait a minute, let me catch up with you.
Yeah. Or even it's almost like giving ourselves permission and a means to just set that aside for a moment.
Absolutely.
Knowing that we'll always be able to access our grief.
Absolutely.
It's patient. It waits for you. But sometimes just a few moments of relief from that can have a tremendous effect.
There's a lot about knowledge and brain power and all the things we do in life that requires us to have a reset moment. It requires it, because if we keep thinking and thinking and thinking on one thing without taking a little reset, it wears us out.
Right.
And so if you get a break, it makes a big difference.
Yeah, and many times you can't progress beyond a certain point. You wind up in some sort of cycle. Yeah, and it's hard to break free from that.
Yeah. It can bring you to a new level of healing that just allows a slight improvement in how things are processed.
So aside from, we mentioned the impact of this fight or flight mechanism on our ability to sleep well, on the way that we approach food, the way that we digest our food.
Absolutely.
And certainly our desire for food. Are there other areas that get impacted as a result of the stresses induced by grief?
If we can allow our mind to be calm for a little while, if we can allow, if you can get oxygen in there, nice calming oxygen, so everything isn't frazzled like a short circuit in your brain, you can actually start to process better.
Yeah.
It does a great thing. So it works there.
You know, it is such a fascinating topic. Of course, oxygen is the most urgent of our needs, right? It affects us much more quickly than the need for food or the need for shelter or any of those other basic needs, and it is so immediate, and yet we have a tendency just to sort of treat it as an automatic response, and so I think the core message here is that we have the opportunity to make that a conscious process, to make it a skill that we develop over time and get better at, and then reap the benefits.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be difficult, and it doesn't have to be a lifetime of training.
Yeah. Well, that's the scary thing, because you know, some people make it such a big deal that, but I think it's one of those 80-20 or 90-10 kinds of things with you know, 20% of the effort, you get 80% of the benefits, or maybe more.
I think even more.
Yeah.
I think it's a step to understand what our body processes are, what we're doing, and if once you get some understanding that you have some control of something, because it's an out of control problem with grief. It's a very difficult time.
Yeah.
And this is something you have control over.
Right.
And that's about all you have control over, really, in the as it goes.
And yeah, that's such a core issue for many of us. We just feel a loss of control, that the world is spinning away from us, and just to be able to bring one small element, I guess it's not really small, but one
Simple
common element that really becomes foundational for us is taking the right step towards healing.
Yes. And probably doing this minimal breath work, laying in bed is great, but also outside. Get outside.
Yeah.
Because it has its own kind of freshness to it.
Right, right. And we can breathe there too.
We can do that.
So in future episodes, we're gonna explore some more of the proper ways to breathe and the impact of breathing done well on our well-being. And so I'm really looking forward to continuing our conversation.
And I look forward to helping and being here. Thank you.
Thank you.